You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Back in 1860, there was a significant conflict within the Ottoman Mutasarrifate of Mount Lebanon involving the Druze and Maronite communities. This brutal war led to the tragic deaths of around 10,000 Christians and at least 6,000 Druzes, marking a dark period in the region's history. When World War I came around, it was an incredibly tough time for the Lebanese. Many Arabs were enlisted to fight on behalf of the Ottoman army against the advances of the British and French forces. Following the war, with the Ottoman Empire's defeat and eventual collapse between 1908 and 1922, the French took control over the area. They were acting under the French Mandate for Syria and Lebanon, which was established by the League of Nations. During this period, the French went on to establish the state of Greater Lebanon, intending it to be a safe place for the Maronites. However, this new state also included a significant Muslim population. In 1926, a major milestone was reached when Lebanon was declared a republic and a constitution was put into place. Unfortunately, this constitution was put on hold in 1932. The country was divided, with various groups either pushing to become part of Syria or aiming for independence from the French rule. Amidst this political turmoil, in 1936, the Maronite Phalange Party was created by Pierre Gemayel, adding another dimension to the country's complex political landscape. World War II and the events of the 1940s led to significant changes in Lebanon and across the Middle East. Lebanon achieved its independence on November 22, 1943, after being promised freedom earlier. This followed the departure of Free French troops who had arrived in 1941 to oust the Vichy French forces from Beirut, eventually leaving Lebanon in 1946. The Maronites took over the leadership in Lebanon, establishing a parliament where Muslims and Christians were each allocated a fixed number of seats, setting a precedent for the president to be Maronite, the prime minister Sunni Muslim, and the Speaker of Parliament Shia Muslim. The 1947 United Nations partition plan for Palestine stirred up a civil war there, ending with the formation of Israel on May 14, 1948. This situation escalated into the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, causing many Palestinians to seek refuge in Lebanon. By July 1958, Lebanon found itself on the brink of civil war due to tensions between Maronite Christians and Muslims. President Camille Chamoun aimed to dismantle the power of traditional political families by promoting alternative political figures in the 1957 elections. However, this move sparked a conflict known as the War of the Pashas. Relations with Egypt worsened when Chamoun refused to sever ties with Western powers during the 1956 Suez Crisis, angering Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who viewed Chamoun's actions as supportive of the pro-Western Baghdad Pact and a threat to Arab nationalism. President Chamoun, recognizing Lebanon's military weaknesses, especially in defending its borders, feared external invasions. This vulnerability later paved the way for Palestine Liberation Organization guerrilla factions to establish bases within Lebanon. Early conflicts in 1968 highlighted the Lebanese army's inability to maintain control over its barracks against the Palestine Liberation Organization. In the midst of these tensions, Prime Minister Rashid Karami and many Lebanese Muslims favored joining the United Arab Republic, a union of Syria and Egypt, in contrast to the majority Maronite and other Lebanese who wished to remain independent. Facing threats internally from former political bosses and externally from Egyptian and Syrian influences, President Chamoun sought U.S. intervention, citing a communist plot to overthrow his government. The Arab nationalist movement, led by George Habash and later evolving into the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine among other groups, were deployed in Lebanon at Nasser's behest to support this insurrection. In 1958, a critical juncture was reached when Maronite Army commander Fuad Chehab refused to use force against Muslim demonstrators. The Phalange militia stepped in to help the president, eventually playing a key role in quashing the unrest and leading to a counter-revolution as labeled by journalists. This change helped bring down Prime Minister Karami's government and ensured a role for Phalange leader Pierre Gemayel in the newly formed cabinet. Estimations suggest the Phalange had a membership of a few thousand, though these figures vary. The involvement of many young Lebanese in quashing the uprising, viewed as largely being incited by external proxies like the Arab nationalist movement and Fatah, as well as defeated local political figures, marks a significant chapter in Lebanon's history, reflecting the complex interplay of internal politics and external influences during this period. In the 1960s, Lebanon was enjoying a period of relative peace, but things started to shift as Fatah and other Palestinian Liberation Organization factions became active among the 400,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanese camps. Initially, these groups had centered their armed activities in Jordan. However, after King Hussein of Jordan cracked down on them during the 1970 event known as Black September, they were forced to leave. Fatah and other Palestinian factions tried to stage a coup in Jordan, similar to a past attempt by the Arab nationalist movement under Nasser's direction. The aftermath saw these groups relocating to Lebanon, where their presence disturbed the country's delicate sectarian balance. Many Sunni Muslims in Lebanon showed support for the Palestinians, hoping to shift the political system to increase their share of power. The Lebanese national movement, aiming for a more secular and democratic Lebanon, began to include Islamist groups at the encouragement of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This inclusion led to a shift away from progressive demands by January 1976, as the Islamists opposed a secular state, favoring instead rule by Muslim clerics. This brewing mix of ideologies, including Fatah and the Tripoli Islamist movement Tawhid, had an agenda that diverged significantly from many groups, including communists. Despite often being labeled left-wing, this coalition notably included conservative and religious elements, with no broad ideological unity, motivated instead by various specific grievances. These dynamics allowed the Palestinian Liberation Organization and Fatah to turn western Beirut into a stronghold. Fatah, making up 80% of the Palestinian Liberation Organization membership, essentially took control of this area and influential parts of Lebanon, including Sidon and Tyre. South Lebanon, densely populated by Shiites, saw its locals facing the indignity of Palestinian Liberation Organization-controlled checkpoints, signaling the Palestinian Liberation Organization's forceful presence in Beirut. The Palestinian Liberation Organization's expansion was supported by volunteers from Libya and Algeria, as well as local Sunni Lebanese groups trained and armed by the Palestinian Liberation Organization Fatah. According to Rex Brynan, these militias were mere extensions of Fatah, lacking ideological foundations, existing solely because their members were paid by Fatah. The 1975 fishermen's strike in Sidon marked the beginning of escalating tensions. Protesters rallied against former President Camille Chamoun's attempt to monopolize fishing, an issue that quickly gained political dimensions. The situation intensified when a sniper killed a respected local figure, Maruf Saad, under suspicious circumstances. Despite some reports, there's no solid evidence pointing to a government sniper as Saad's killer. Farid Kazen's research indicates Saad wasn't in conflict with the fishing company, but was rather integrating fishermen into its operations. This move, however, might have made him a target, leading to heightened unrest. The government soon found it challenging to control the situation, signaling the onset of larger conflicts in 1975. In the spring of 1975, Lebanon was on the brink of war. Tensions were high as minor clashes escalated into more serious confrontations. The Lebanese national movement clashed with the Phalange Party, while the national government struggled to keep the peace and please its people. On the morning of April 13, 1975, a tragic event occurred when unidentified attackers in a speeding car shot at a church in Ain el-Rumane, a Christian suburb of East Beirut. This attack resulted in the death of 4 individuals, including 2 members of the Maronite Phalangist group. In retaliation, Phalangists, under the leadership of the Gemayel family, killed 30 Palestinians in the same area. This act of violence, known as the Bus Massacre, led to widespread clashes throughout the city. By October 1975, the conflict had escalated to an intense confrontation known as the Battle of the Hotels, which continued until March 1976. A particularly dark moment, known as Black Saturday, occurred on December 6, 1975. Following the murder of 4 of their members, the Phalange set up checkpoints in Beirut, inspecting IDs for religious affiliation. This led to the immediate execution of many Palestinians or Lebanese Muslims identified at these checkpoints. The Phalange also took hostages and attacked Muslims in East Beirut, prompting retaliation from Muslim and Palestinian militias. The violence of that day resulted in the deaths of between 200 and 600 civilians and militiamen, marking the beginning of full-scale fighting between militias. On January 18, 1976, A horrific event known as the Quarantina Massacre saw Maronite forces kill an estimated 1,000 to 1,500 people. This was quickly followed by a vengeful attack on Damour by Palestinian militias. These massacres caused fear among the population, leading Muslims and Christians to flee to areas controlled by their respective sects. This movement further divided the city into Christian East and Muslim West Beirut, highlighting the sectarian nature of the conflict. The war also discouraged alliances between Maronite leftists and the Lebanese national movement, as well as between Muslim conservatives and the government. An important outcome of the massacres was the involvement of Yasser Arafat's Fatah and the Palestine Liberation Organization on the side of the Lebanese national movement, given the total alienation of Palestinian sentiment towards the Maronite forces. On January 22, 1976, Syrian leader Hafez al-Assad stepped in to mediate a truce in Lebanon, even as Syrian forces secretly began to enter Lebanon, pretending to be part of the Palestine Liberation Army. The intention was to regain control over the Palestine Liberation Organization and to stop Lebanon from falling apart. Nevertheless, the violence only worsened. By March 1976, Lebanon's President Souleymane Frangieh was calling for Syria's formal help. Shortly after, Assad reached out to the United States, asking them to look the other way if he decided to send in troops. In a notable turn of events on May 8, 1976, Elias Sarkis, who had Syria's backing, won Lebanon's presidential election, but President Frangieh would not give up his position. By June 1st, Syria had dispatched 12,000 soldiers into Lebanon to combat Palestinian and leftist groups, oddly placing Syria and Israel on the same side. Israel had started supplying arms to Maronite forces the previous month. Syria had its motives, keen on Lebanon for political and strategic reasons, including the presence of groups opposing Syria's government. Starting in January, Maronite Christian militias laid siege to the Tel al-Zartar refugee camp in East Beirut. By August 12th, backed by Syrian forces, they overpowered the camp's defenders, culminating in a tragic massacre of between 1,000 to 1,500 civilians. This act drew widespread condemnation towards Syria from across the Arab nations. On October 19, 1976, the Battle of Aisha saw a coalition of Palestine Liberation Organization and communist forces attack a Maronite village. Israel's military intervened with tank and artillery support, thwarting the attackers initially. Despite this, the attackers' nighttime return under cover of darkness forced the village's Maronite population to flee, not returning until 1982. That October, Syria agreed to a proposal from the Arab League meeting in Riyadh. This allowed Syria to station 40,000 troops in Lebanon as part of the Arab Deterrent Force, tasked with ending the fighting and establishing peace. Although other Arab nations were initially involved, interest waned, leaving Syria in control, using the Arab Deterrent Force as protection against global criticism. The civil war hit a pause, and a fragile peace returned to most of Lebanon. However, the situation in the south began to worsen as Palestine Liberation Organization fighters, pushed out by the Riyadh Accords, started to return. Between 1975 and 1977, the conflict took a devastating toll, with 60,000 people losing their lives. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.